This is the 17th round of the candidates tournament played back in 1959. A tournament too big for one city. They rotated from Bled to Zagreb to Belgrade, and this game against Paul Benkő was played on October 6th, 1959. Paul Charles Benkő was born in Amiens, France, where his parents from Hungary were vacationing. That was on July 15th, 1928, and he learned chess pretty young at the age of 10. He won the Hungarian championship in 1948 at the age of 20. He became an international master in 1950, and after beginning his chess career in Hungary, he defected to the United States on October 17, 1957. The following year, he tied for third and fourth place at the Poderos Interzonal Tournament, thereby qualifying him as an international grandmaster and qualifying him for the candidates tournament. Paul Benkő won or tied for first place in the U.S. Open 8 times, and he was inducted into the United States Chess Hall of Fame in 1993. Benkő qualified for the Palma de Mallorca Interzonal Tournament in 1970, but declined to play, giving up his spot to Bobby Fischer, who won it convincingly and went on to win the World Championship. I've often said, were it not for Paul Benkő, we would not have had a world champion from the United States in 1972. Benkő died in Budapest, Hungary on August 25th, 2019. Let's get right into the game. We have pawn to e4, pawn to c5, a Sicilian defense, knight to f3, pawn d6, pawn d4, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, an open variation here on the board. Knight f6, knight c3, and pawn a6 is Miguel Najdorf's variation. Bishop to c4 is Lipnitsky's attack, and queen's knight to d7, marked inaccurate by the annotator. The book move in your encyclopedia, volume B, section 90, is pawn e6, the most popular book move, and that transposes to a Scheveningen, which means it transposes to Sozan's attack. We get bishop b3, b5, the flank variation, kingside castles, bishop e7, queen f3, and from here there are a couple of different lines you can play, either queen c7, queen g3, and castles here. White exploits this piece relationship and plays bishop h6, black defends with knight e8, queen's rook to d1, and bishop d7. Coming back on the alternate line, instead of castling here, black can also play knight c6, putting the question to its counterpart here on d4. That's answered by knight takes knight, queen takes knight, rook e1, and bishop b7. Let's come back even further. After queen f3 from white, black can also play queen b6. That's answered by bishop e3, lining up with the queen, queen b7, queen g3 here, pawn b4 hitting the knight, knight a4, queen's knight d7, pawn f3, and now black castles here. Coming back one last time, instead of b4 right here, black can castle right here, and you will once again see the bishop come to h6, and the knight drop back to e8 to defend. So those are the main variations of the flank. Instead, Bobby Fischer played his queen's knight to d7 here. a4 from Paul Benkő, g6, castles, bishop g7, bishop g5. At this juncture, white has some other options as well. Very common is bishop e3. And also queen e2, which the bot seems to prefer. Paul Benkő with bishop g5, Bobby castles. Queen a5 is an option here as well, hitting the bishop. That's going to be answered by knight f3 defending, and then castles. Instead, castles right away by Bobby Fischer. Queen d2. You can play pawn a5 here to prevent the dark matriarch from accessing that square. Benkő with queen d2. Knight c5, super attacking the e-man. Pawn f3, defense. Bishop d7, now pawn a5. Rook c8, very principled in this line. We're going to see this rook come to the half-open file almost every time, sooner or later. b3, defending the bishop. Knight to e6. That's marked inaccurate. The bot prefers pawn e6. I had my eye on rook e8, and I get a check mark for that. Knight e6 from Bobby. Bishop retreats to e3. Queen c7. King's knight drops back to e2. Bishop c6. That's marked inaccurate with knight c5 being called for by the bot, and that's going to be followed by king's rook to d8, no doubt. Fischer with bishop c6, rook a2, also marked inaccurate, b4 recommended. The idea of b4 is to vacate the b3 square with a bishop. Benkő with rook a2, knight d7, knight d5, hitting the queen. Queen retreats to d8, and the annotator preferring that we play more actively and simply capture the knight. Bobby with queen d8. King's knight to c3, knight b4 is the annotator's preference. Discovering the hit on the knight once again here. Instead, the king's knight transfers to the queen's knight's usual spot. Knight c7, also marked inaccurate. The bot saying knight ec5. Knight ec5 is the bot's recommendation. I would think bishop takes knight is still good here as well. He gets a check mark. Knight c7 from Bobby Fischer, and now knight to b4 here. Held in contempt by the annotator. Rook d1 called for. Yeah, on rook d1, we're simply adding some support to this knight, which is amply defended, isn't it? But this has the added benefit of vacating f1 in case you ever need to reroute your bishop. Instead, knight b4, knight e5 was played. Bishop e2, queen e8. That's marked inaccurate. The bot preferring knight d7. Knight a4, also inaccurate. f4 being called for. Hit the knight. That will have to retreat to d7. And after knight takes the bishop, we get pawn takes the bishop. And now you can play knight a4. Let's go back. Here, Benkő plays knight a4 straight away. Bishop takes the knight. Rook takes the bishop. Knight c6. Marked inaccurate. Knight b5 is the move recommended here. Discover a hit on the c file. Instead, knight c6 from Fischer. Knight d5. Not liked by the bot. Bot prefers to trade. I thought c4 might have been an option, although you are blocking your bishop. I get a thumbs up. Knight d5, Benkö's choice. Knight takes the knight, pawn takes the knight, don't take it with the queen. If queen takes the knight, then you're going to see the bishop come to c3. Coming back, pawn takes the knight, knight to e5. Knight b8 is being called for here so that you discover a super attack on that square, not blocking your bishop with your knight. Bobby goes ahead and plays the knight to e5. Bishop d4 is given a star. I had f4 in my mind, hitting the knight. I get a star as well, and then the knight would retreat to d7, keeping the c file open, and white can continue to push if he so desires. Coming back, bishop d4 from Benkő. Queen d8, their knight d7 is being called for as well. Bobby with queen d8, pawn f4 here. Now knight d7. Bishop takes the bishop, not liked by the bot. King takes the bishop, and now bishop g4, pinning the knight to the rook and preventing pawn e6. Rook c5, marked as a mistake. Ah, yes. Play f5 here first. Kick that bishop out of there. Instead, Bobby with rook c5. Bishop takes the knight. Queen takes the bishop. Now pawn f5, clearing the fourth rank for rook h4. f6. Don't play king g8 here. On king g8, you relinquish the control of the h6 square so his queen can come in, and it's curtains from there. The only way to prevent rook h4 is to sacrifice your queen for the rook, and that's clearly not desirable. So f6, f takes g6, which is the right way to go. You don't want to now play rook h4 because that will be answered by g5, and then you'll have to move your rook elsewhere, giving black a free move. Coming back, Benkő wisely playing pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes the pawn. Now rook h4, threatening the queen to h6. Pawn g5 interposes. Rook back to e4. You could play rook h3 as an alternate. Instead, rook e4. Queen c7, battery attacking the c-man. So c4. And he's got a battery of his own that he'd like to set up with queen e2. Rook takes a5, marked inaccurate. The bot calling for e5 in view of the battery threat on the e file. Now, I know what you're thinking. Can't he take en passant? It's not good because that shields the e8 square from the rook. Your pawn is your own obstacle, and so a battery on that open file becomes irrelevant. Well, rook takes the A-man was played. Pawn h4, marked inaccurate. Pawn b4 is called for here. And look at the eval bar really favoring Benkő over here. That's going to compel me to move to a3, and then you can play h4 over here. Coming back. h4 played right away. Pawn takes the pawn. A mistake. Again, that eval bar says this is decisively in white's favor. It is move 35, so it's possible that they're in time pressure. e5 still looks good here in my mind. But g takes, h4 was played, king's rook to e1. I liked just capturing here, and once again, threatening to bring in the queen. So, for example, rook g8, queen h6 check, and king f7. Another option is to simply play queen d1, and you're accessing the king on various lines here. The rest should be easy. If rook h8 stopping queen h5, queen g4 check, don't play queen d4 here, because now h3. But queen g4 check, king f8, and queen g6 paralyzes the dark monarch. Coming back, king's rook to e1 was played, battery attacking the e-man. That's a Forcosaurus Rex, isn't it? So e5 played at last. He does play en passant, but that gets a question mark. Although the eval bar still giving white the nod, it's not to the extent that it was a moment ago. Once again, to me, the move is going to be rook takes the pawn, with queen h6 coming in. So on king g8, we'll play rook g4 check, king f7, and here comes the queen. And white has this game in his pocket. Missed opportunity for Benkő today. Instead, pawn takes the pawn en passant. Rook g5, closing off the lines. Rook takes h4 now. Queen c5 check. Rook g8 might be a valid alternate here, by the way. Lining up my rooks, and I'm going to get my king out of dodge, but don't play rook h8. That's going to be answered by rook takes rook, and on king takes rook, we're going to have pawn e7. You can stall for a half of a second with a check, but there's no way to stop this pawn from promoting, and black is simply lost. Well, Bobby with queen c5 check here. Queen f2 marked as a mistake. The eval bar jumped to dead equal. Rook e3 is the move being called for here, and now b4 would be a winning move. So we'd have to play a5 to prevent that. And now queen f2. You don't want to play queen d3 here, hoping for a swallowtail checkmate, because rook h8 can now be played, and black is back on a level table. So queen f2 now can be played. And white still has a slight advantage. Coming back, Benkő with queen f2 straight away. Well, rook e5, rook g4 check, king h6. Note that the white queen is pinned, and therefore the rook on e1 is undefended, and therefore we're threatening to take that. For that reason, queen takes the queen. The bot said that rook d1 is more accurate. On rook d1, I'm playing rook e8, and on rook h4 check, I'm playing king g7, and then on queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, rook d7 check, king g6, rook takes the b-man, and our e8 rook takes this e-man, and that's basically a dead draw. Coming back here, instead of rook h4 check, he could also double his rooks on the fourth. That will be answered with rook e8 captures the pawn, and on queen f3, rook g5 holds everything together. You could try that rook d4 later as well. We go back to rook h4 line. On rook h4 check, king g7, you could also try the rook d4 here. And it's the same thing. It's just different. After queen f3, we're going to play rook e7. And we have a nice tuck-away place for our king. Let's go back now. Benkő traded queens on c5. Of course, we don't take the queen first. We take the rook first because it's check. And king f2 is the only way to ensure that you'll have time to regain your material material after black regains his material. Meanwhile, white is still threatening rook h4. So we do regain the queen, and he does regain the rook, and that brings us to king rook versus king rook. You might feel like white has a small advantage with this passed pawn, but it seems that his king is too far away to come and help it, and that's why the eval bar is dead center. In fact, rook e8 was played. Pawn f5 might be interesting, hitting this rook, but after rook g3, we're still going to... Okay, that's marked inaccurate. At that juncture, I'll still have to hit this pawn sooner or later. Rook e8 straight away from Bobby Fischer, and rook e4. Rooks belong behind passed pawns. King g7, pawn g4, rook g8. King f8 felt a little stronger to me. Use your king to blockade first and then bring the rook over. Rook g8 from Fischer. Rook f4, pawn b6. Don't come back to rook e8 here, because that will just repeat. Pawn b6 from Fischer. King d2. g5 is another option here. And on pawn takes the pawn, rook f7 check. And after king g6, you come after black's weaklings on the queen side. Benkő played king d2. Now rook e8, rook e4, rook h8. You could also play king g6. Let's see what we get for king g6. A star. Bobby with rook h8, rook f4. Rook e3 might also deserve consideration just to defend the b-man, but rook f4 it is. Rook h2 check. That's marked as a mistake. The bot says give check here. And you could also just hit the pawn again, for that matter, right? I get a star for that. Bobby with rook h2 check, king d3, rook h3 check, king d2. Wow, that is an interesting move, saying go ahead and take the pawn here. The bot calling for king e4, which of course intends to play the king to d5 and c6. Benkő played king d2, pawn a5, pawn g5, rook f5 might have been interesting there. Pawn g5 was played, pawn takes the pawn e7, rook h8, rook f5 now, pawn g4, rook g5 check, king f7, rook takes the pawn, king takes the pawn, rook g7 check, king d6, rook g6 check, king c7, king c3, king b7, rook f6, king a6, rook g6, rook h3 check, king b2, pawn a4, pawn takes the pawn, king a5, rook f6, and they agreed to a draw. Both players with better than 90 accuracy, so a fine fighting draw in this game. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, have a great day and play some great chess. Bye now.